elected conference until now. I'm retired now. I was for a long time a member of parliament, a member of the Senate later on, and then for 4 years in 2007 a Minister of Defense. But today, well, I'm doing what I like to do as a retired politician, of course. And one of the things, well, two things are interesting to tell you. That is, I'm a member of the board of a large organization that is protecting the rights of churches, almost all churches in the Netherlands, towards and in interaction with the government. And the second thing is, I'm the chairman of a supervisory board of the Netherlands Institute for Multi-Party Democracy. We assist developments towards multi-party systems in so-called fragile states in Africa, Asia, and so on. And that is intellectually challenging, very interesting to do. I'm used to act in a minority position. I've always been, as a member of parliament, and so on, in a minority position. Today, we are for the second time the Christian Union member of a cabinet. So they get used to it, or to us in the Netherlands. That must be a very positive challenge for you, Ivan. But today, and in 10 years ago, only 5 out of 150 members of parliament were from the Christian Union. Of course, they need us for the majority, but that was not the whole story. To be honest, it never felt uncomfortable. All parties in the multi-party system, like the Netherlands, are minority parties. We never had a majority party. Even the UK today is a multi-party system, more or less. Of course, not all parties in a system like the Netherlands are that small as the Christian Union. For years we are, I think, well represented by good members of parliament. Of course, most of they not always liked our program. Why should they? But they accept us as professional politicians. And sometimes the word skills are mentioned by Paul, I remember. Don't underestimate the importance of being a skilled, a professional politician. That is one of the reasons why they will respect you. And then started your very specific line of argument. We are well rooted in Dutch history. Well, like you can, as I heard this morning. To be honest, in the 19th century, the party formation on Christian basis was the first in the Netherlands. We do represent a part of our society, of our population, that has a profile of hardworking, stable and moral persons. We are independent, especially independent from a church. We are not the voice of the church in parliament, of course not. That is. So we really do believe in the separation of church and state. And even you gave a marvelous Old Testamentic answer on the question of separation of church and state. It is a Christian principle. It is not a liberal or enlightened principle. There it's radicalized. But it's in historically speaking and principally speaking, it's a Christian principle. Read, for instance, the famous work of Augustine. And we are well known as Christians, but also as a political party that do respect the rule of law, the separation of powers, the parliamentary institutions and procedures, the constitutional context, and so on and so on. And we were never, and that also is important, never a one-issue party. I can imagine that you start as a one-issue party, but you have to broaden your scope as soon as possible. From a theological or confessional point of view, we do believe, and I do believe, let's speak for myself, that Jesus Christ is the King of all kings. Amen. That's my first amen. Amen. I'm not used to it because I'm a Protestant. I like it. I like the atmosphere. I'll try it. Yeah? Yes. Next time, hallelujah, please. Yeah. So, but I'm very the world is the domain of Jesus Christ. So nothing in this world is neutral or can be secularized. Not in my family life, not in my heart, not in societal life, not in the state. The state is owned by God. That is a basic conviction to start with, of course. And then you have a lot of work to do in your country that is country-specific, historically specific, and so on. But a basic conviction. That is quite normal. Quite normal. Like social democrats or communists had a basic conviction about the development of history in a dialectical way of the struggle between classes. That's also a basic conviction. So don't shame yourself for that conviction. It's not enough. It is our responsibility to make it more productive in the here and now of politics, to relate it to actual questions. And again, my experience in a long period, that is difficult, it is challenging, but it can be a deep joy, a privilege to be a Christian politician. It is not a contradictio in terminus. Sometimes people think that it is not, because the state, the public domain is also owned by God, by Jesus Christ. And that's why it's a joy, a privilege to be active and try to be productive in the political arena. We do not come to the political arena with empty hands. No, with a lot of normativity on all terrains of this world. And I do believe that Christians can be, not always, but can be a blessing for our society. I have one historical argument. If you look to the history of Europe, the Christian founded parties in different forms, of course, are the only parties that were never revolutionary. The Social Democrats were sometimes, the Liberals even were in the 19th century. We were not. We were a stable, reliable partner in the political arena. Well, from the richness of our Christian world and life view, I like that Christian world and life and world view. I like that word, because be careful with using the Bible as direct political argument. But from that riches, we can think about, for instance, the relation between a topic as climate change and the biblical principle of stewardship. We can think about what is the hardcore, the deep core of the value of freedom. Not in a liberal way, the freedom to express yourself to the limits, to insult or to offend everyone. No, we do believe in the importance of freedoms, because God gave us a conscience and God gave us the duty to speak out, to express our beliefs to the world, because the world has to be saved. And that is the reason why we think that freedom of speech and freedom of press is that important. Freedom is not only individual, well, that's the modern theme, of course, but it also has an openness to our neighbors, to the state, to society, and so on. We do believe in the value of equality, but not in the stupid, empty, mathematical way of our modern culture, but because man is created by the image of God. That's why we do support the human rights of everyone, of the unborn child, of the LGB community if necessary, of capitalists even if necessary. If they have rights, we have to protect them. They are all created in the image of God. That is why life is has so much value. I think the most important word I like to use about Christian politics is justice. Justice you find in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. Justice is a very pivotal value of human society and the states. And again, it's a joy to explore that conviction from the scriptures to the, for instance, the lawmaking process. So if we as Christians, and I have a lot of experience with that, are talking about the penal code, there is more to say than only punishment. If we are talking about international relations, about war and peace, there is more to say than only power. If we are talking about economic relations, there is more to say than the value of economic growth. I know this is online, so I have to be careful, but it's a quotation, I've forgotten from whom, but a Christian is a good citizen. Well, maybe it's a little bit better to say he has to be a good citizen, but a Christian is a good citizen. While he accepts the legitimacy of a government. We know the government as a normative institution is a God-given creation, a God-given institution. And we can be critical towards that institution, but nevertheless, that's why we accept it and why we are in the end never revolutionary. We pay our taxes because Jesus asked us to do so. We love freedom. We love the freedom of press for reasons I already mentioned. We do respect property of other people because the Ten Commandments ask us to do so. We help the needed in different forms because it's a continuing line from the Old Testament, from the law-giving of Moses towards the teachings of Jesus. And all those basic convictions you can use in here and now and in actual politics. I realize, well, I'm from Holland and you are here living on Malta. There can be very different reasons to have a Christian political party. I don't think it's a command. A command from God that you, if you have the possibilities, that you do start a Christian political party. You can be a good Christian in the United States without a Christian party, in UK and so on. But there is more to say. If you have the freedom, you have to answer the question, shall I do it or not? Like you are maybe are trying to do here. Sometimes, and there can be very different motives. There can be a motive of restoration. Some of the voices this morning were a little bit about that. Of longing to a Christian past of your country, or an imagined Christian past. Now I'm being a little bit critical of that history. That can be a motive. There can be a longing for justice against a corrupt government. That is very noble, very essential. Opposing a fundamental wrong economic structure. Like, for instance, the theology of liberation in Latin America in the 70s and 80s. There can be moral motives, a little bit like in the United States, that because of new policies in the field of the gay marriage, family life, the child protection, and so forth, Christians are becoming more political than they were before. And sometimes, very simple, you have no choice. You want to be a good citizen, you are longing for justice, and the only possibility is to organize a political party. That can also be very legitimate. Again, my party in the Netherlands is well respected, although very small. We have an outspoken Christian profile. If journalists are coming to our congresses, like today we have our congress, Christian, but I have to be here. You asked me to be here. There is praying, there is singing, there are the hallelujahs, sometimes even, although we are a Protestant party, sometimes there are, and the form is very modern with those type of things, etc. So I'm proud of my party. I'm one of the programmatic founding fathers of the Christian Union, and as I told one of you, after a couple of years, we realized that sometimes, even in politics, 1 + 1, because it was a combination of two parties, 1 + 1 can be 3. And I think the Christian Union was. And the union was formed, and 5 years later we were asked to be responsible on the national level, being a party, being a member of a coalition. That was a very difficult question for us. I can tell you. We were beaten several times, many times in Parliament in the 90s, in the 80s, and later on. First about very, very tough debates on abortion, then on euthanasia, then on the gay marriage, and so on. We did oppose it, and they know it. And still in our program, we do oppose abortion law, etc. Of course, we have to accept the legality of those laws. That's the way it works in the democracy. But we are opposing it also from inwards. And we realized that when they asked us in the 90s, for instance, we had refused. I'm sorry, but we will not be responsible for that type of new laws. But this time, in the Netherlands, we are facing different challenges. Neoliberalism with its economical effects, climate change, multicultural society, especially in the Netherlands. The problem of refugees and asylum seekers, well, you have your share. Terrorism, populism, etc. That's one of the things I'm proud of. A Christian party is longing for the populace, for the people, but is not a populistic party. I think it's completely ridicule to tell I want to make Holland great again. And we have a rich history in the 17th century. We were one of the main powers. Make Holland great again. It's crazy from a Christian programmatic point of view. Because it's like someone else already told, it is also excluding other people. And that is not good in a democracy. So we are not populistic. We were asked again in 2007, more than 10 years ago, for the first time. And we did so. It was a little bit an adventure, but we had proven parliamentary, that's something else, but proven parliamentary skills, a good reputation of being honest, and so on and so on. And well, we are Protestants, so if they ask us to be responsible, it's very difficult for us to say no. So we said yes. We had 2 ministers in the cabinet. My colleague was our political leader. He became vice prime minister and formed a new department, a small one, about youth and family. That was a typical profile department for the first time in history. So that was marvelous, I think. Maybe even more interesting was that they gave me, or they gave the Christian Union, the very classical department of defense. Well, at that moment, defense or our operation of Afghanistan was one of the most sensitive political topics we had in the Netherlands. At some moment, I'm speaking about, I had about 2,000 military in Afghanistan. In my period, 25 soldiers were killed in combat. Why should a Christian want or Christian politician want to stay away from that? Why do you think we can't speak in those circumstances? To be honest, I, myself and also my party, I'm standing in a very long tradition, starting, I think, with Augustine, about thinking what is the relation between the morality of the New Testament, for instance, of the Sermon on the Mount, on the one hand, and the questions of using violent, legitimate or not, war and peace on the other hand. That is a very long tradition, the so-called just war tradition. I was familiar with that. So I found it quite normal to be, as a Christian, a minister of defense in those circumstances. But at the first night we were, with the whole cabinet, on television, we were presented to the people, the first question I got was, well, Mr. Van Middelkoop, you are now the Minister of Defense. Well, tell us, how can you combine being a Christian, well, they know that I was a Christian, that was a compliment, with the responsibility of a Minister of Defense? Still today, I'm grateful for that question. Because I could give a very biblical answer, and if you are interested, please ask me later. I could give a very biblical answer. And, well, that was, I think, enough. Everyone, of course, has to answer the question about war and peace and violence, but I could give a biblical answer, because I was familiar with the so-called just war tradition. I can tell you one wonderful anecdote, because I had in those days also one time something with Malta. In the same period as we were very operational active, and we were one of the leading nations there. The Americans, the Canadians, the British and the Dutch, they were the only lead nations in Afghanistan. So that was quite tough. But in the same period, we started to send Navy ships to the coast of Somalia fighting piracy. And after a year, our forces and other forces were combined, sometimes in NATO and sometimes in the context of the European Union. Well, Malta is, of course, a member of the European Union. So at a certain moment, but Malta has no big ships, etc., I can imagine, but wanted to do something. So I got a request from the Maltese government, as a minister, if they could put a boarding team on one of our platforms, a frigate, very modern ship. A boarding team is a team of very professional, well-trained military that you can send with a helicopter or with a speedboat to the pirate ships. That's a dangerous work. The advice of my chief of commander was, you can do it. So I said, okay, let's do it. A couple of months later, I brought a visit to Djibouti, and I went on the ship. I met that team. They did their work very well. I got the compliments of the commander of the ship. He was very satisfied to have not Dutch boarding team, but for the first time a Maltese boarding team. Well, we went on a picture and the photo, etc., etc. When I flew back to Holland, I had a stop in between here in Malta. I went to, I think it's the palace, to Mr. Ganzi, the prime minister in those days. I gave him my compliments about the professionality of the military of Malta. I gave him the pictures, of course, and he was very grateful. It was a wonderful moment, and then I flew back. So that was a good example of cooperation between those two countries. All those years, in coming back for a minute, as a parliamentarian, but especially as a minister, no one was very critical towards me because I was a member of a small party. I spoke with in the Pentagon. I spoke with the Secretary General of the United Nations. Even an informal 1 minute with Barack Obama. I was one of the leading persons in NATO. No one said to me, "Well, you're only a Christian party. You're only a small party." No, you have a position. You are a minister. At Sunday, I was in church every Sunday, sometimes even 2 times with my wife. Later on, I heard that a journalist was making a profile of me for his newspaper, went to church because he wanted to see how it worked there, now how I acted there. Wonderful. I prayed before dinner. When I was in somewhere, please give me a minute of silence, because we used to pray before dinner. That is our style, and they respect it. Well, to be honest, that is not that difficult, because when I was a parliamentarian, sometimes my very secularized colleagues said, "Well, moment, silence, Aymet has to pray." And they gave, well, but you can sometimes provoke respect from your colleagues. Then that was Malta and Ganzi. Well, I think Malta and the Netherlands has a lot of things in common. Not only a rich history, although very different, of course, but also that we are small countries. And that is one of my basic convictions, talking a little about 1 minute about security, that Malta and the Netherlands have a well-understood interest in a rule-based international order. That's next to many other reasons I don't like the way President Trump is acting today. We have an interest in a rule-based international order, that there are tables in Brussels, for instance, where we can speak, where we are obliged to listen to us. So let's cooperate as much as possible. We need also international institutions. I have a long career as a very critical politician towards European Union, to the European integration. I don't like federalism, etc. But I do believe in some form of cooperation for the sake of our interest and also from the interest of countries like Malta. We have to cooperate. One of the things we have also in common, and maybe it's easy for me to say, that is about the problems of migration, asylum seekers, and so on. I realize you have your share in that. That is different than my country. And I want to say here and now I'm on Malta, that I have a deep admiration and a full respect for those people who, for humanitarian reasons or from out of the church, are trying to help those poor bastards coming from Africa to Europe for well-understood reasons. On the other hand, I hope that we can stop it for several well-respected reasons as well. But we have also to be humanitarian. And then, of course, we have to ask the state to do something very difficult thing. It's an international topic. It's an international challenge. So we have to solve it in an international way. And that brings us together, the Netherlands and Malta, within the European Union. I know there is a lot of egoism also in the European Union within some countries. But I think we are trying to help you as much as possible. And that, my dear friends, is also a Christian view. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this really interesting intervention. We'll next have Karen Hiepen take the stand. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be back to Malta. I've been here a little bit more than a year ago, together with the European Union of Prayer to Valletta. This is a group of intercessors visiting every half year the capital of the country, which is holding the EU presidency, and praying for the country and for Europe. And if I introduce with this, I want to say, without prayer, we won't change anything in our countries and in Europe. And on this trip, I learned quite a lot about your history and how deeply Malta is and the history of Malta has been rooted in Christian faith. And we have heard about your history and that you have to do with a wide range of people from all over the world because of your exposed location in the Mediterranean. And that you have been many times a country, actually a transit country. And now Malta became again a popular transit country to the recent refugee flows from Northern Africa to Europe. And so migration became again an issue facing your country and facing whole Europe, and that's my topic now. The issue of migration is dividing Europe and also Germany, where I come from. And as you know, Germany has received most of the refugees in 2015. And the reaction of the population is completely divided. Some of them welcomed the refugees, or many welcomed the refugees and took care of them sacrificially. Others watched the flows almost in horror, and warn more and more on the consequences of this invasion, as they say. On one hand, this is about the burdens on our social system, of course, but the great concern is actually how the immigrants are going to change our culture, because they come from a different religious and cultural background. And the people fear that the Muslims will take over the Christian Occident. Let's wait. As a result, we have a political polarization in Germany like never before, between globalists on one side and national conservatives on the other side. This is actually the ideologies behind their reactions. The question for us as Christians is now, what can our response be? I'm chairwoman of a Christian party in Germany, a small Christian party, and we have worked on this topic in order to come up with answers. That bring the two sides together somehow in the population. And in ECPM, we follow an approach which is called relational thinking. And it will be explained later on by our next speaker, Gabriela Orbanova. I just mention it because I use this approach and we use this approach to find answers also to the migration crisis. Relational thinking does not only ask for right or wrong on the factual level, but we ask, how can we build good relationships in our society? How in Europe? How about our neighboring countries? Peace and the common good in our society depend on good relations. And where is enmity, we have disturbed relationships. This is quite clear. When Jesus says that he is the truth, it is going beyond our thinking in right and wrong, because he's a person. And we experience truth in relation to him. As we know, the supreme commandment is to love him and our neighbor. And this commandment forms the basis of the relational thinking. In the polarization of our countries and of Europe, because of the refugee policy, this relational thinking can be a key to bringing the poles together and giving answers beyond the positions that are irreconcilably opposed now. As Christians, we are called to make peace in such situations. And for this, we need answers others than those which seem right or wrong to a minority now or a majority. The truth is neither left nor right in the political spectrum. This is about ideologies, but the truth is Jesus Christ. Let us first look inward with this relational approach mentioned. How can our countries deal with the refugees? The capacity of a society to integrate immigrants is actually measured by the extent to which the local population enters into relationships with the migrants. Politicians can promote this, but they cannot demand it or force the locals to do so. And Christians, and especially the churches, often cite Jesus' commandment to love for the unconditional reception of refugees. But love is either given voluntarily or it is compulsion, but not love. And the forced solidarity of society must fail. Where there are no relationships between natives and immigrants, we get parallel societies, as we call them in Germany, with the well-known side effects. And there are neighborhoods in the big cities where mainly Turks are living in Germany. They are living for 3 generations now in Germany. It's about 4 to 5 million people. And they have their own shops, mosques, even schools. And some of them live according to their own Sharia laws, and where the German police often stay out and do not interfere anymore. German politics has failed to create conditions for these Turkish immigrants to be integrated in our society. Consequently, the integration of refugees is being talked nowadays about everywhere and at all times in order to prevent and to avoid the same mistakes. However, this ignores the fact that a refugee status under our legislation is limited to the time when the danger exists and lasts in the country of origin. Especially in Syria, where most of the refugees came from, the war is coming to an end, and there are areas which are safe meanwhile. As a party, we therefore take the position that we should train the refugees well, especially for their country of origin, in order to give them a solid perspective for their return. Our economy makes really great efforts to accept and train refugees, but understandably not altruistically completely. Many see them as workers who can make up for our big shortage of young people and professionals. And I read a statement of one of the largest trade unions in Malta, which appealed for the integration of refugees in order to sustain the pension system. It is questionable, firstly, to what extent this will succeed, because the educational level is often very different. We have to realize. And it takes years to bring them up into jobs and so on. And secondly, I don't know whether we will thereby live up to our responsibility to for the refugees and their countries of origin. In a relational thinking, we ask not only about the rights of the individual, but also about duties and responsibility. And here the young, mostly unmarried men feel highly committed to their families. Since they have a strong commitment and attachment to their families, they want to bring them to Europe, of course. However, in Germany, family reunion is only possible for spouses and children, so they have actually no chance to bring them there. And so we have to broaden the horizon of these young men beyond their families for their responsibility, also for their homeland. And the question is, how do they and we as host countries best live up to this? We don't think that these young men came to Europe above all to compensate for our shortage of young people, that we have created ourselves over generations, but their primary responsibility remains for their countries of origin. And we therefore distinguish between refugees and immigrants. And this is unfortunately becoming increasingly blurred. The UN Migration Pact generally wants to turn illegal into legal migration and eliminate the differences. From a Christian perspective, by the way, we can also actually not justify attracting qualified professionals to us, to attract them to us at the expense of economically weaker countries. This is another question, what I don't speak now, but just by the way. By a good training for refugees, I mean not only vocational training, but also training in fundamental rights and duties of freedom. And I call it intentionally, rights and duties of freedom, which we can counter their Islamic culture. There is a huge gap between our individualistic culture. Paul called it the culture of me, myself, and I think, and the collective culture and thinking, especially in the patterns of family clans and in the Islamic culture. And we can bridge this gap between the two cultures very sensibly with the relational thinking. And that is neither is repressive, like the culture in the Middle East in a way, nor promotes a freedom without responsibility for the common good, as in our society. Here we have above all, here we are above all in demand as Christians, as we have an example for this relational thinking in the body of Christ, in the Bible, how we can live in a balance between the needs of the individual and the community. Besides, many Muslims fled from their warlike conflicts of their Muslim brethren, and they are shaken in their religion. Many of them become Christians in Germany, thanks God. But this usually, of course, only happens where we as Christians come into contact with them and build relationships with them. If we try to keep them out of our parish, that won't rather happen. We do not promote family reunion unconditionally because the Arab family structures and Islamic family structures with their code of values are rather strengthened in our society when families are together. And they tend to prevent openness to new values and also to integrate in our societies. And our chance are the somewhat uprooted young men without families in our country now, and we should offer them family connection in our midst, in our families and in our churches, and this is our chance to shape them from our Christian values, so that they hopefully become Christians, and after their return, they can become initiators of social and political changes in their home countries. Of course, I am aware that many of them will not return, but if they do not return at the end, we have certainly done nothing wrong and given them the tools to assume responsibility in our society. And the worst case is leaving them in our social systems or even in camps, because unemployed young men are a danger to any society. So maybe you realize that domestic policy and foreign policy are not really possible to be divided in view of migration, and so let us throw a few blows at foreign policy. If the European Union makes itself blackmailable through Turkey with the refugee deal, we will support and do support a regime from which more and more people are fleeing to us, from Turkey to Germany. In northeastern Syria, there is a democratic self-administration with participation of all ethnic and religious groups. It's not only Kurdish, as the Turkish say, but they take it as a reason to attack repeatedly this area of the so-called Rojava administration in contravention of international law, as most recently in Afrin, without any serious intervention from the Europeans, from European governments towards our NATO partner. This is a shame, and we can't support and strengthen in such a way the Turkish system, as Erdogan is becoming more and more a dictator. If we want to effectively reduce causes of flight in these regions, we must support political actors fighting for a culture of freedom there and not the dictators. Similarly, there is no reason to maintain the nuclear pact with Iran, which turned the blind eye to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's military nuclear program and thus supports the Iranian regime. There is no reason to trust this regime more than the Israeli government, and thereby put at risk our relationship to Israel and its security. So we see the support and spread of fundamental freedoms as a key element in the development of a safer and more stable world in generally. And this is why we apply the same principles in our policies at home and abroad. Of course, we cannot enforce these fundamental freedoms in other countries, but Europe can cooperate with political and social actors in the Middle East and North Africa to work for these freedoms, who are working for these freedoms, and not to support the governmental corrupt systems. Of course, besides all diplomatic relations and all other attempts to improve the human rights situation with governmental actors as well. So this will help to promote their fundamental freedoms, will help to the development in these countries and the integration of people from this cultural background in Europe as well. And it is the most promising way to deal with Islamism, to support a culture that is no longer a breeding ground for terrorism. And beyond this, it is a way that we most effectively advocate for discriminated minorities and persecuted Christians. So, and this fight for fundamental freedoms must also be a part of a strategy for Africa. Christian Meinen will speak about this later on, but facing corrupt governments and in order to give hope and perspective to the people there, we have to support these fundamental freedoms in Africa as well. And as Europeans, we have responsibility for our former colonies. We've pulled more out of these countries than we've given into them. Development aid has so far hardly improved living conditions and the economic conditions. And so we believe that we must invest above all in local vocational training, for example, for young people, to give them a perspective to live there and not to leave the countries. Finally, let's have a look at the opportunities for a common EU migration policy. Migration is not a competence of the European Union, it is a competence of the member states, and the EU must therefore respect the limits of national tolerance towards immigration. This may be bad news to you because you have to deal with quite a lot of immigrants and hope to distribute them in Europe somehow. But however, it will not work to distribute these asylum seekers among European states against the will of certain states. So as inside our societies, forced solidarity does not work. It doesn't work in Europe. And it's just no chance to push it through. The control over each country's capacities is a national responsibility and must be respected. And because of that, we have, first of all, a responsibility in Europe to protect our external borders altogether. And that's what we really can do, because the Schengen Agreement gives the citizens of Europe great advantages when traveling, working and trading within the Union. And on the other hand, the abolition of the internal borders has also consequences, and they have been opened before the refugees came in, and they just paved the way for flooding all over Europe. So we cannot leave the necessary protection of the external borders to you in Malta and Greece and Italy as countries bordering the Mediterranean, but the member states with external borders must receive financial, material and personal support from the other states, since external border control is in interest of all countries. To this end, the Frontex agency in particular must be better equipped, and border military police units could respond to increased demand in the short term. It is, however, intolerable that Libya, Morocco and Turkey permanently invade the territorial waters of European states. This violates the borders of the EU as well. And if third countries violate these external borders, the EU must adopt a clear position. of solidarity and take decisive action against them in order to protect our European interests. At the same time, dear friends, we must not take Europe a fortress. We need walls and we need gateways. We must protect Europe's borders effectively, but we must also create access routes for refugees and persecuted persons. In all the challenges that migration brings to Europe, we must not question the right to asylum, because this would mean abandoning our Christian values and our understanding of human dignity and fundamental rights. One solution is to set up hotspots for EU asylum application in Northern Africa and Middle East. This is in work somehow. If it will work, we will see. But this can help the neediest to get asylum rather than the strongest who get on the way to cross the Mediterranean. Let me conclude by saying a word about Islam. It is bad for us as Christians to act against Islam out of fear and to stage the threat before all. To our Christian friends in the Middle East who really have reason to fear Islam after 1,000 years of oppression, I used to say, who is the victor of history at the end of times? Is it Islam as the Muslims believe, or is it Jesus Christ? We all know the answer, and we should act in this consciousness. Approach our Muslim friends with raised heads, building relationships, and explain the truth to them. It is so much easier for them to become Christians in Europe than in their countries of origin. Perhaps that is why they have been brought here. Maybe that was the plan from above, and God entrusted us and our church. It's not about saving the Christian Occident, but about saving people, our own as well as immigrants. So let us use the time we have, and at the political level, let us help to protect freedom of religion for this purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Now I'm inviting Gabriela Urbanova. Do we have the video now? All right. So I should inform IT to send through the video. Is that all right? It's up? Okay, very good. Thanks. All right. Switch off lights, please. Could we also switch off the stage? Small floodlights?
Than words. Yes,
Small floodlights.
I like this as a real creed of one's life. My name is Branislav Škripek. I'm a president of European Christian Political Movement, and I'm a member of European Parliament for Slovakia. I'm very happy that I'm in contact with Ivan Mintov, who is in cooperation with our think tank SALUT organizing this conference. I am involved in a committee in European Parliament, Committee for Civil Rights and Inner Freedoms, and also I'm in delegation for Israel, which means that we members of that delegation are focused on keeping good relationships between EU and the State of Israel. But my focus is also on persecuted people, persecuted minorities, persecuted Christians, on Middle East. But I'm also focusing on keeping and bringing back to European politics values, principles, and good way of life of Christian thinking and understanding. Because I am persuaded and I see it that these important values are really disappearing, evaporating from European politics. I think it can bring a disaster. That's why we need to refocus, and you are doing that at this conference. European Christian Political Movement, we are the group also a number of NGOs and think tanks. Our focus is on Europe of human dignity, and I think you understand pretty well what does it mean, and also economics that works for people, because the aim of economics cannot be only to exploit an individual to make him a source of money, but we need to understand this is a human being with a dignity. Also healthy families and healthy marriages, and we understand marriage as a union between one man and one woman, and children. We focus on freedom and security, and we focus on fight against human trafficking, which is nowadays slavery, and also reforming of European Union in its thinking and understanding how it works, what shall we do better, and also preservation on Christian heritage and culture. If you are interested in ECPM, you will find much more information on internet. I also have some very nice personal ties in my life with Malta. I was educated and I grew up as an atheist, a man who absolutely knew nothing about God, and I was educated by my communist mother. But God was so sovereign and so nice to me that He gave me His grace and mercy, and He touched my heart when I was 20. And later, in 2-3 years, I met people from Malta who evangelized my life. And I was involved in their evangelization school, which was called International Catholic Program of Evangelization, led by two brothers. There were twin brothers, Mr. Capello, double, and Mrs. Anna Capello, she was the wife of one of them, and Mr. Fritz Mascarenhas. He was a great preacher who really influenced my life. But for years I didn't visit Malta, but recently I had, as a member of European Parliament, an opportunity to find myself in a conference called State of Europe Forum 2017. As I said, I am very happy to be in contact with Mr. Ivan Mintov because I like people like him who really focus on trying to bring justice and order into society. I am so sorry that Mr. Mintov had to come with a terrible case of misused Schengen and different other kind of visas, which was misused by allegedly, and there is a there is a court hearing now, the whole court case about misuse of the European visa sold by allegedly people from Maltese government into Libya. I do admire his fight and the other connected people like a journalist and other people who really gave their life and their efforts into this fight, and they were beaten so terribly and they were harmed in their life. But I want to encourage all of you, every one of us who will stand for justice. God will stand behind you, and much more people will join.
This was Branislav Skripek, who's an MEP backed up by ECPM. Just for the Maltese public who might not know, ECPM is the European Christian Political Movement, and they have 6 MEPs representing them. So equate that to ours, and that's a huge force, so it's great. Thank you. So now I invite Gabriela up.
Thank you very much. So it's really also a great honor for me, dear honorable ladies and gentlemen, and I'm very happy that I can say here, dear brothers and sisters in Christ, that I can speak here. I'm just to explain maybe more, Mr. Skripek is also my boss. So today, because unfortunately he couldn't come, so I am representing both Mr. Skripek as president of this European Christian Political Movement, and also Salux, our think tank. when I was planning my speech, I was just thinking, okay, I'm gonna say my very, let's say now, typical explanation of the reform of the European Union, which at the end means the reform of economy, because we know everything, if we want or not, in this world, and especially in the cooperation between states and international world, is linked to money, trade, and how we can find the surplus, trying to find for both sides. But as I was sitting here and as I was praying and encouraged by Ivan, I just felt like, okay, Lord is telling me that I should maybe start a little bit in a different way. Just to explain, I'm also coming from a small country, which is Slovakia. And we also, I think right now, both our countries have many things in common, what you have heard already, common together with Netherlands and maybe with some other nations. But in this year, just to explain, we are both countries where Christianity has very, very deep root. But we see in both countries how coming out from Christianity, what this has caused regarding corruption and a lot of bad things. Like, great example is the unfortunate death of Daphne Galizia here in Malta. The same has happened in Slovakia with Mr. Kuciak, who was also a journalist. And both of these cases are unfortunately right now being discussed also in European Parliament. And we know how it much has shaken both our societies. And what I just would like to share with you, because I see here also a lot of young people, is that the main thing is, what also Ivan has already mentioned before, that we just can't sit and just look at the things, but we need to act. And maybe my small personal story. Years ago, when I was studying at the university in Bratislava, I was living at a very nice Christian campus, surrounded by very nice Christian people, very happy life as a young person. But I don't know why, but the Lord was just really, the Holy Spirit was moving me every day to go very close to the campus, in front of our National Council, to the Parliament and our castle, and I just prayed there. I had no clue why this was the place, but I did it for 5 years, almost every single day when I was there. Sometimes some other people came, so we prayed together. Sometimes I was alone, so I just prayed. And then after these 5 years, I just really knew that the Lord was saying to me, you have to go to politics. It was not my plan. I was thinking I will be in the economic sphere or in business, what I was studying. But then I was starting to think, okay, what can I do? As a young person, of course, I applied for hundreds of organizations or whatever. As also a very active person, more wants to speak and act than just to sit. But nothing happened. And I was asking the Lord, okay, what should I do? And then I had the feeling, okay, just start to serve the people. So what we did was that we saw that the Christian in Slovakia, they are very nice people. And of course, they are complaining about the situation in politics, but they don't want to be engaged. Why? Because politics is dirty, politics is bad. So no, we are very happy being in our church. So we started to literally visit different villages and small cities in Slovakia and persuade the people that they need to take the responsibility. So we started to train Christians for the local elections, helping them with their campaigns, helping them with their programs. And at the end of the day, in the next local election, we have been able to raise the number of the Christians about 30%. Of course, we know it's not just because of our program, but we know that 75% of the people with those we have been working in a program called Christian in Politics have been successful and got their mandate. And of course, the situation is still not okay, and there are still disparities also between Christians, but the important thing is that the voice is there. And doesn't matter if we are minority or not. We now see in Slovakia that there is a big new uprising of people who are unhappy with the politics. But just last week, there was on the same day, that there was a big demonstration of young people against the government on the main square in our capital city, Bratislava. And on the same time, we had the biggest youth evangelization in a different building in Bratislava, where have been 7,500 young people. And my main point was that these two groups needs to be together. And why? Why? Because when I saw the pictures from the demonstration, you know what kind of pictures they point out? People standing with the LGBT flag. And if these 7,500 young people would not be together with these people on the main square, then although these people who want to reform the country and the society, they would do it, but because they don't have the real foundation, which we know that is Jesus and his Bible, there will be a misinterpretation. It has to be there. Because as was said, we know that the evil wants just to accuse us and wants just to bring his lies in this world. So it's really important to be part of the reform and of the change. And now coming more to the real topic, what I was supposed to speak. As Karen has already mentioned, I also prepared the presentation, but if it's not here, it's okay. The main thing how we are looking at the reform of the society, European Union, and also economy is through the relational thinking. As Karen has already said, is a principle which the main point is like that we know that Lord is relational because he is 3 in 1, and he is trying to make as most personal relationship with every one of us. And therefore, our role has to be also to try to make the best relationship between each other. And this principle of relational thinking can be used not only for migration, as Karen has mentioned, but all different spheres of society. I can give like 3 examples. It can be like relational schools. Nowadays, we are measuring our pupils, how they perform in math, language, science. But we are not looking at their maybe ability to interact between people and having the big influence of the technology. It is great if someone gonna study medicine and become a doctor, but how bad it is if the doctor is not able to say with an empathy to the patient that it has a cancer. And this gonna become as a big problem for the future and raising trends. Another thing is business. We know that what is the main focus of all businesses is to have a look on the shareholders. Everybody wants to just have a look on the profits and how to raise the revenues and profits for the shareholders. But we know that business is not just about the shareholders, but there are a lot of stakeholders, like the suppliers, like the customers. And there is a big network of people, organizations who are involved. And we are working together with organizations who have proved that actually if companies have a look also on the stakeholders, at the end also the revenues and profit going to be higher and better. And the last example can be the public space and therefore politics. We know that the public is meant to serve the people. But what is one of the main problems? That we feel disattached and disattachment between the public services, the public administration, politics and people. So therefore, how we need to see the change in viewing the politics is to measuring how close the institutions, how close the politicians, how close the public administration is to us as a people. Important thing to say that this model, it's not my idea. I'm just very lucky that I had the chance to be 4 years involved in this. But this is a great idea. It was established in 1993 by Mr. Michael Sluter from Cambridge. He's a very famous and very precious man who created there a center called Jubilee Center. So if you would like to also have more information about this, please have a look on the website of Salux or of the Jubilee Center, who is actually one of the members of our network Salux. Now coming to economy. We see that right now, wherever we are, that the long track toward political unification has actually championed by the large number of usually wealthier Europeans who have gained most by globalization and the single market. But the prolonged economic depression following 2008, caused by many nations' unsustainable debt position, And it really has caused that we see the raising of the so-called anti-systematic parties on both the left and the right spectrum. And we see that there is actually just raising injustice and raising disparities. They are just growing. They are growing between the maybe villages and the cities, between the wealthier people and the people who are on the ground. And we just see that this is raising up. And we see just very, very strong answers. Either you have just the global politics, which gonna solve everything, or you have just the very strong national politics. But does it really has to be the only voice which is right now trying to go through the media? Therefore, like ECPM and SALUX, together with this Jubilee Center, came with an idea of reforming of the European Union for so-called confederal model. We name it that we think that if there are going to be strong nations in Europe and in European Union, then they're going to be at the end the strong European Union. So how we have to do this? We need to reform and have a different look on what we have in common, where are the areas where we really cooperate very smoothly, and where the surplus and the benefits are on both sides, and where on the other hand it is just one side or one hand. So we came with a practical solution, practical idea. We have a book which is called Confederal Europe, Strong Nations, Strong Union. You can find some copies, Christian left and the back, and you can find more information about this, but just to explain it. Practically, in the political structures, we need to amend the Lisbon Treaty and to redefine union as a strong confederal structure rather than a federation. Because we see that everything what is just going on, we are speaking in the international level, ever closer union. But we know that in the democratic principle, the politics should respond on that what people want. And now we see the Brussels dictatorship that now through the law, they are trying to actually persuade us as a people that this is the democracy and this is that what we want. Another thing is that we need to see a long-term perspective. And in long-term perspective, we see there is importance to have more engaged the young generations. And why? Because the politics which is done right now, the decisions may be about the budget, and that means the indebtedness of the countries, they are done today, but then someone needs to repay the bill, and that is going to be the young generation. Another thing is regarding the international finance within the EU. We think that we should apply symmetrical discipline to current account surplus economies and current account deficit economies. Because we see that right now, the last days we had in the news that the European Commission has cut off or doesn't agree with the budget of Italy, which has a deficit. But on the other hand, is it really only that way? Shouldn't we maybe there also say where should be the borders of the surplus economies, which then they can actually gain much more from also on the costs of the other countries? We also think that there has to be not only viewed that GDP is the only way how we measure the growth and the wealth of our society and of our economies. Another problematic issue regarding the finance is the Eurozone. We are not saying at all that European Union or Eurozone is a bad project and it shouldn't exist. And for small countries like Malta, like Slovakia, it has really helped a lot regarding our international cooperation and exports. But on the other hand, it is important to say that there has to be a way how countries can also go out of that system, and that we should change the aim that all or every countries from the European Union needs to ratify or needs to become member of the Eurozone. And why? Because practically we again see right now the injustice that the same 1 euro has a different value, let's say maybe in this case in Germany, which is maybe 1.3, and in Greece where is 0.7. We also think that important issue, which actually is now linked to very much to Brexit, is regarding the single market, which is the main, let's say, victory or the main pillar on which the European Union practically is established. All of us, we agree that it's great to have the open trade and have the free movement of capital, of goods, of services and trade. But the problematic issue is people and the migration, which Karen has much broadly developed. And we see that actually one of the reasons why the Brexit has happened was the disagreement or disappointment of people regarding this issue. I can give another example that, like Slovakia, right now more than 60,000 of people are working as a social workers, especially women, in Austria. It is a bad thing for our families because it means that the women actually are not with their children but working somewhere else for the elderly of another country. But right now, till now, in Austria, the Austrian government has been paying the childcare services to these families, to Slovak children who are living in Slovakia but their parents are living in Austria. But the Austrian government has right now said that, okay, we think that this is our right and that we don't want to pay this because these children are not living in our country. And I, as a Slovak person, although it's Slovakia, I need to say, yes, they have this right. But what is the European Commission saying? No, 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 you cannot do this. So we think that there has to be still the space for the national sovereignty, speaking regarding the social security, and which is very much linked to the free movement of people. Another area which I would like to maybe point out is that we think that we should give the city region a decisive role in the area of economic planning and the raising of the investment capital and the distribution of welfare. We also think that we should build the social resilience by intensifying the collocation of relatives and restoring competencies to extend families and sharing network so as to reduce demand on the national welfare budget. Because another important point for us is that we think that really we should be or say where is the stop in the indebtedness, because we see that how much are many countries just raising their indebtedness, which I mentioned before, someone needs to pay. But what can be a concrete solution? We see right now that states in many different countries is paying for the social security and social care about the elderly people. But when the families are taking care about their relatives, it's meant, okay, this is the family and you don't receive this benefit. And we know that because of the relational thinking that the family is the main area where we should focus. So why not actually, instead of the state-paid system, why do we not more support again the care of our elderly people by their family relatives, what was actually for a lot of decades the area where we have been working. So just to conclude, we in ECPM, we believe in generally that economy is about life. Therefore, we think that the purpose of all economic activities is to support life, relationships, and advance the well-being for all. Economy is meant to provide sufficient means for all people to support family, life from conception to natural death, to let people flourish with their creative talents, and to find solutions for the problems we face. We think that the economic policy should strive for an economy that is people-oriented and not financially centered, as it was mentioned before, applies the potential of technology by respecting the human dignity, insist on transparency, cultivate long-termism, and is as inclusive as possible, and does not cave into pressure from vested interest at the expenses of other stakeholders. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So there's going to be a slight change to the program. So because I know people are hungry and maybe we'll have a break a bit earlier so you can have your lunch. So our last speaker for the session, Christiane Main, who's going to talk about Trade Salix Foundation, will be shifted to the last session. So then we'll have Edwin Caruana, Christiane, Peter, and Ivan to close off. So we're going to have an hour for lunch. I hope that should be enough, right? People at the back? Staff, okay, very good. So thank you very much. We might have questions in the last session that will work better, I think, for everyone. We'll bring the panel together and we'll close off all together with questions that you might have. Thank you so much.